My name is John David Mann, and I am the co-author of the book Steel Fear, which came out last year, and that's not what we're here to talk about, because I am also the co-author of Cold Fear, which is coming out on June 7th of this year, and that is what we're here to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, Phil Gerbyshak, my host.
Thanks, John. Thanks. So I'm super excited, man, to talk about this one. We talked about the last one. We didn't record a podcast, but we did have a conversation about it.
We did.
So let's talk about this. So the last book was stationed, I guess, on the Abraham Lincoln, right? It's a SEAL book about your co-author, right, Brandon Webb, and now this one's in Iceland. So take us back, right? Finn here was our trusty guy. Interestingly enough, Finn also, isn't that the name of a Star Wars character, John?
Oh man, I don't know. I'm not enough of the name of my dog. I'm aware of that.
Oh, there we go. So it's your dog. Okay.
It's also the name of a certain character created by one Mark Twain. There are many things about Finn.
Yeah, Huck Finn, yeah.
You know, Brandon and I had the idea for Steel Fear. So actually, let's do a little bit of context. Steel Fear, which came out last year, first of the series, the debut novel, my debut novel, never written a novel before, certainly never written a thriller before, which is an extremely exacting, in my view, difficult format to write in. But so that was the first. Brandon Webb, my friend, former Navy SEAL sniper, and I had the idea for this book over a decade ago. Brandon had the idea for this book back in the mid-90s when he was stationed on the Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier on a Westpac, a Western Pacific tour. In the days before he was even a SEAL, he was a sonar operator on a helicopter crew and a rescue swimmer. And the phrase rescue swimmer, by the way, becomes critical in the new book. So Brandon had this idea of a basic plot, and I won't go down that rabbit hole for this conversation, but it ended up with this disgraced, traumatized, extremely troubled, I'll even say damaged Navy SEAL, this character Finn, stalking a serial killer on this aircraft carrier. And the what if of the story is, what if there were a serial killer on an aircraft carrier? 5,000 to 6,000 people shut up in a steel tube the size of the Empire State Building, dropped in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and you can't get on or off, and locked room mystery with a very, very big locked room and many, many suspects. The basic plot around the serial killer in the aircraft carrier was something that Brandon had a germ of years earlier, and we'd sort of kicked that around, and we had that in the back of our minds for years as we wrote a series of nonfiction books. What made this series come to life was the character of Finn. And I spent, Phil, I'm going to say 2 years, maybe it was more, kind of kicking around, who is the hero going to be? Who is this guy going to be? Because Brandon didn't have that element in the story worked out. And Finn is actually based a little bit on Brandon. I mean, I borrow a lot from Brandon's life, which I know really, really well, having written so many books about him and with him. But Finn isn't Brandon. Brandon isn't that damaged, traumatized person. Finn is also based on a real person who will forever remain nameless, who suffered a seriously traumatic event in his childhood, which is similar to the seriously traumatic event that Finn suffered, and grew up to become a very damaged person. And I borrowed his psychological profile and kind of melded that with Brandon's military experience and a bunch of other just imagination, and created this guy Finn. So here's what I'm getting to. The Finn books, they kind of operate on 2 tracks. Actually, they really operate on 3 tracks. It's a mystery. Each book is a mystery, right? It's a thriller. It's a mystery and a thriller. And a mystery means there's a puzzle to solve. Thriller means there's tremendous suspense and probably some action. Both of those things are true of these stories. So there's the plot. It's kind of there's a procedural element. Procedural is like why we love to watch CSI. Procedural is a professional trying to sort through clues and figure something out, whether it's a pathologist or a detective or whatever. In this case, there were a bunch of different people going through their procedural, trying to figure out what the hell is going on here. I guess I just got to say an R rating for saying that word.
That's fine.
We'll survive. So it's a procedural, it's a mystery, it's a thriller. But on another level, there's also this psychological drama of Finn's story. Finn has huge gaps in his memory. He has big pieces of his past missing, big pieces of his childhood missing, and also pieces of his recent past strangely missing. I say strangely because he's prized by his superiors, by his whole military infrastructure for his incredible powers of observation and memory. Right? He's a SEAL sniper. Snipers are principally intelligence assets. They're not just super marksmen. They're trained observers. That's what they do. They infiltrate behind enemy lines and they observe territory and they come back and they report. So anyway, the mystery in Steel Fear of the serial killer on the aircraft carrier, it got solved. We found out who did it in the end. But the mystery of Finn's background, what's going on with that, is one that carries over and will carry over into book 2. It'll carry over into book 3. It's going to keep carrying over through a series of books.
Cool. Yeah. So why Iceland though for this setting, John? Why is that? Why'd you guys pick that? Is there something magical to Iceland?
There is, and that is exactly why we picked it. I mean, a big part of Steel Fear was that the environment of an aircraft carrier is so weird, so strange, and so foreign. Phil, can you excuse me for a minute? I hate to do this, but I have to make our dog stop barking because my wife's in the middle of a broadcast on the other side of the house. So sorry. Hope everybody bears with me.
The joys of working from home.
The exigencies and joys of working from home. Yeah. So the aircraft carrier is such a weird environment that a big part of the job of Steel Fear was to describe it in such a way that it puts you there. Now you, Phil, have been on an aircraft carrier, in fact, on this very same aircraft carrier, as we talked about last time. Phil spent time on the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is the same ship that Brandon deployed on and the same ship that Finn is on in the first book. But most of us didn't spend months in an aircraft carrier. And so we needed to bring that environment to life. Kind of like, if you're writing a book about, soldiers on Mars and you got to make Mars come to life. It's kind of like that. So for the second book, we thought, well, where do we go now? Like to a submarine, to a battleship, to a spacecraft? Brandon had told me about a trip he took one time for a couple of days, about a week, to Iceland in the middle of the winter. And he described it. And it's such an odd, strange, mysterious environment. Iceland is so unusual, both physically. They call it the land of fire and ice. It's a land of volcanoes and icebergs and glaciers and earthquakes. It has more earthquakes per year than California. Iceland is actually the top of a mountaintop. It is top of a mountain peak that is part of the longest mountain range in the world, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is an underwater mountain range. Iceland is situated on the peak of a mountain, also situated right in a crack where the Eurasian plate and North American plate come crashing together. And those two plates are sucking apart by about an inch per year every year. So it's fraught with earthquakes and volcanoes, and it's a land built out of the geological upheavals of the earth. And it feels like it. That Norse mythology that Neil Gaiman has made famous and that the Thor movies have capitalized on, and a lot of that is sourced in Iceland. Some of the oldest texts of Norse mythologies come from Iceland. It's one of the oldest languages we know. It is home to the oldest functional parliamentary democracy on the planet. Iceland's parliament goes back over 1,000 years. Iceland had the first female head of state on the planet. Iceland's capital city is the northernmost on the planet and right near the Arctic Circle. It's a wild place. It's just bizarre on every level. Social, historical, geological, and it was so much fun to take people into this strange world of Iceland and make it come to life. So that Iceland itself is almost like a character in the book. Jeffrey Deaver, who is the novelist who wrote, I'm trying to remember the name of his most famous book. Yeah, it'll come to me. Hunting Time is the one he's got now, so that's what's in my head. But Jeffrey Deaver wrote in the back of the book, he says, this is hands down one of the best crime novels of the year, which was very sweet of him. And then he says, and on top of that, I now know Reykjavik like a natural born resident. And that was the goal. I wanted people to know what it's like to live and breathe in Iceland.
Wow. The Bone Collector, is that the one you're looking for?
That's it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I was thinking skeleton, bone collector. Yeah.
Yeah, Bone Collector, Coffin Dancer, Stone Monkey, Empty Chair. Yeah.
Yeah, so, a long running series. I think Bone Collector was the first in the series, I think. Anyway.
Yep, I think so. So
there it is.
Cold Fear, Iceland to life. Have you been yet, John? Is that in the plans? Are you going to do a book tour there?
Wrote it. We have friends, great friends in Iceland, and have high hopes for a great presence for the book there. But I'm not physically going there. I wrote it during the height of COVID, and we weren't going anywhere. It just wasn't happening. Iceland was closed anyway to Americans or to just about anybody. So part of the challenge was to learn the environment without being in the environment. And that's kind of like the challenge of writing a story is stepping into the skin of your character without actually being that character. One of the things that's really been gratifying for me is a couple of early reviewers have said some very kind things about the female characters in my stories, in these stories, about they really make these female characters have depth and they're rich, full spectrum characters. One reviewer said that the Icelandic detective in this book, who is a woman, is so strong that she could spin off her own series of books, which I think is such a wonderful compliment for an author who is not a woman, right?
Yeah.
So how do you write a woman when you're not a woman who feels so real? It's like, how do you write Iceland when you don't visit Iceland? How do you write anything when you haven't actually experienced that yourself? That's, part of the answer to that is imagination, but I think the bigger answer is empathy. Just like, how do you understand people in your life?
Yeah.
How do you understand your colleagues, your friends, your other people?
Wow. So around that, I'm just curious. I mean, John, I met you when you wrote The Go-Giver.
Right.
Then, you wrote a fiction with Bob Berg about sales. Then you wrote The Go-Giver Marriage with your wife.
Right.
A fiction fable about marriage. And now you've got this wonderful, delicious thriller. Any similarities between the three, or are they completely different, run different parts of your brain?
The thriller is really different from the parables. Parables, these short, sweet stories that are told to make a point, to teach a lesson, if you will. I mean, that's what parables do. Going back to the New Testament and far back beyond that, to Aesop's fables, and from the dawn of time and storytelling, we've been making up little stories that make a point, like eat your vegetables, or watch out for the saber-toothed tiger. So they're very different because a parable is a super stripped down story where there's very little detail, and you don't give the characters backstory, and you don't say what color their hair is, and you don't have a lot of their thought process going on. It's kind of like, it's almost like mime, or let's say it's like theater on a stage, right? Live theater, as compared to a novel, which is like a feature film. Where you do the sets and you do the costumes and you do all the research and you have all this backstory and you have flashbacks and you have a crew of hundreds of people and a budget of $200 million or whatever it is to fully flesh out this story. That's what a novel is. You flesh out the story. And so it's really, really different. And a thriller is different because you have to run this taut thread and you can't ever let it drop for even a moment. You got to keep your reader going, kind of like, whoa, what's going to happen next? Because that's the engine that drives the story. That isn't the point of the story, by the way. That isn't the value of the story. But that is the engine that drives the story, that sort of suspenseful thread. But what is the value of the story? What is the point of the story? It's actually really similar to the parable. In some ways, they're very similar. They're both stories. And what makes them interesting, what makes them valuable, in my view, is, I mean, yeah, in The Go-Giver, there's this law, these laws of stratospheric success. And in The Go-Giver Marriage, there are these 5 secrets to lasting love. And in the mysteries, the killer is revealed and, hopefully apprehended, and the mystery is solved. And so the puzzle is answered. But what the value of the story is in both cases is the journey that the character goes on. It's the change that happens to the person, the experience that happens to the person. That's why so many people I've encountered so many people in business who kind of look on parables with disdain. Parables, I don't really care for parables. And I understand why, because there are so many parables that don't feel like they're real, like the stories don't feel, they're not engaging. They're not, and forgive me if I'm dissing. I'm not going to say who I'm dissing, but the parables that we all know are not what I'm describing. They're wonderful. Parables like The Richest Man in Babylon, or The Alchemist, or The Little Prince, if you want to call that a parable. Even The 1 Minute Manager. The parables that are classics that we know and love, Who Moved My Cheese and what have you, they succeed because we get really engaged in what's going on with these characters, even the little mice. We really get engaged with what's happening to them. And I think that's what makes them work. That's the value, because to the extent that I identify with Indiana Jones, then when he figures out that he really does love his father at the end of, what's the third movie called? I forgot. Indiana Jones and the
Temple of Doom.
No, that's the next one.
Chamber of Solace. I don't know.
Yeah, the Quantum Solace of Indiana. Yeah, it's the one where he gets the Holy Grail. Indiana Jones, Last Crusade, baby. I think it's.
There you go.
Yeah, what the Holy Grail that he's chasing, or the Ark of the Covenant in the first movie he's chasing, Hitchcock calls that a MacGuffin. The MacGuffin is the thing that the movie is about, but it's not really about that. So in The Alchemist, a book that is on so many people's favorite books list, what the boy Santiago wants is to get to the pyramids of Egypt. He wants to find treasure in the pyramids of Egypt. So that's what the journey is about. But that isn't what the journey is about. Because in a really great story, there's something that the story looks like it's about, what looks like it's the goal, and there's really a deeper goal. And so, yes, in these books, solving the killer, solving the murders, that's the goal. But it's really a MacGuffin. It's an entertaining MacGuffin. It's hopefully an immensely satisfying MacGuffin. But it's not what the story is really about. What the story is really about in The Go-Giver Marriage, of course, is lasting love. That is what the story is about. It's about these characters finding lasting love. What the story is about in the case of these Finn books is what happens to Finn, to this character. It's not finished. It's going to take probably 5, 6, 7 books to finish it. But the more I write about this guy, the more I write about his journey, the more kind of moved I am by it, the more intrigued I am by it. And hopefully that will be true for the readers too.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, you definitely, you grip strong in the book, and there's a lot there. It's not just Finn too. I mean, to your point, lots of other cool characters that engage,
have their own journeys. Yeah,
they do. They do, which is probably why that one reviewer said you could spin one of them off to give her own series, which is wonderful, right? That's really cool. But I'm just, of course, the first one, Brandon was on the Lincoln and maybe seen Iceland for a week, but I mean, was it your idea or his idea to put it in Iceland, or both of you?
It was actually my idea, but it was spurred by it was time to write the second book. And when the publisher bought our first book, they offered us a 2-book deal. They said, we want to buy, big sound. They said, we want to buy your book, but we want 2. So we knew we were going to do a second book, but we didn't know what it would be about or where it would be set. When it came time to think about that, Brandon had told me this story of being in Iceland. And I thought, yeah, that's going to be a really, really cool environment. So I called him up and said, or I emailed him and said, let's have a call. This is how we work. We do most of our stuff by email, but when it's time for a call, I'll email him and say, let's have a call. Got on the phone. I said, tell me about Iceland. Tell me about your visit. So he described it. And I said, great. And I went off and I took what he described and I turned it into a description. I think it's in chapter 6 of Iceland, which so captured my imagination that we got to do this. We got to do this here. So that was the. I'm not going to go try to read it now, but it's a really fun description, and that's cool. that's how we decided. Yeah, fun challenge.
Great. So as this isn't based on Brandon's life, is there a germ here of truth in Cold Fear as well?
There's yes and no, more no than yes. This is not based on real events, and Steel Fear was inspired by something that actually happened.
Sure.
Although there wasn't murder involved in the real events. Not here, but there are pieces, there are elements of the story that are drawn from real life. There's a key plot element that doesn't get revealed until late in the book, so I can't say what it is. That is drawn straight from the past, from elements of truth in reality. And so throughout, there are elements of reality that we just pulled and wove as strands into the fabric. But the fabric itself, the story, it's fiction, baby.
Cool. So does someone have to read Steel Fear to get into Cold Fear? I don't think so. Do you?
You don't have to. No. There's some key background of events from Steel Fear that are important to know in Cold Fear, but that's okay, because in Cold Fear, I tell you, one of the really fun challenges when you're writing serious fiction is if you have something like that, where you have a second story that's building on a first, you have to bring people along if they haven't read the first book in such a way that they're not left out, but also in such a way that if they have read their first book, they don't get bored. Like, yeah, you're repeating what I already know. So that's a fun challenge, and it's not as difficult as it sounds. And so, you do not have to have read Steel Fear first to read Cold Fear. If you read Cold Fear and then you go back and read Steel Fear, it'll be kind of fun, because it'll be like, oh, I see where this came from. And so there'll be things like that happen that'll be kind of fun. I don't think it matters which order you read them in. There are a couple of major spoilers from the first book that I had in Cold Fear, and we went through and sort of judiciously plucked them out. So we didn't want to do too many major reveals. Didn't want to give away surprises if you hadn't read the first book yet. The first book, by the way, I should say, it's currently out in hardcover, but it's coming out, like, from when we're recording, in a couple of days from now. It's coming out next Tuesday in mass market paperback. That's the kind of paperback that fits in your back pocket.
That's exciting.
Walmart, Target, all these places. So it'll be easy to pick up a copy of Steel Fear and catch up on the origin story of Finn X, who has no last name.
Yeah, cool. So John, I normally I would end with, like, how do we get started on this, right? We normally talk kind of nonfiction parable, but instead I'm going to flip that around. So book 3.
Yes.
Do you guys have a title? When's it coming out? What is your thoughts? I know we want to promote Cold Fear, but I'm just curious. I'm going to put you on the spot here.
That's okay. In the back of Steel Fear, the first book, there are 4 or 5 chapters of Cold Fear, the second book, which was really, really fun, because we had to come up with those chapters before we'd written the book, and that was very, very challenging. In the back of Cold Fear, there's no book 3 sample. However, there is a book 3, and I'm in the middle of writing it right now. And I will leak the title. You heard it here. It is Blind Fear.
Ooh.
I will not tell you where it's taking place, but it's not Iceland, and it's not an aircraft carrier. And we're going to face another heinous, terrible awful plot, meet some wonderful people, and Finn is going to pull together a few more pieces of this story, of his puzzle, of the puzzle of his story.
Yeah, cool.
Coming next summer.
Yeah. Oh, good. So summer of 23. That's awesome. So
yeah.
Steel Fear is already out, coming out in mass market paperback. Cold Fear will be out June 7th.
June 7th.
Hardcover.
And we're going on a book tour starting on June 7th. We're not going everywhere on the planet, but we're going to a handful of selected spots. It's on our website, which is webandman.com.
Web and Man. That's 2 B's and 2 N's.
You got it.
Webandman.com. Cool stuff, John. Well, congratulations on another beautiful book, man. This one's even prettier than the last one. Hold it up again so people can see how nice it is and shiny. It's a
gorgeous cover.
Yeah, it's a big, thick read that'll take you all summer to really savor and enjoy, unless you sit down and can't put it down like I couldn't. John, thank you so much for spending time with me, man. It is always great to see you, my friend.
Thank you for bringing me in. I love it.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And thanks for listening and watching.